What's the matter? Can't you talk with a gun in your mouth?
You're not approving your methods.
Yeah? Well, you're not from Chicago.
Hello and welcome back. And this episode is really another unique one in the sense that I'm talking with somebody that I've known for a while and I haven't formally podcasted with. And we're also talking about a movie we've talked about already, and a movie I'm sure we're going to talk about a lot more based on the feedback I've been getting from potential guests. So I'd like to welcome my friend Dan to the show. Dan, welcome.
Thank you very much, Craig. This is an honor and just a lot of fun to be discussing this particular great piece of film making with you.
Yeah. So as you know, on the second episode, we talked the church scene from The Untouchables. We are back in The Untouchables, and we're going to be talking about an epic scene, which we'll get to. And Dan, I'm glad we were able to finally sit here and chat because I know we've been sort of online friends for a while, and we never had the opportunity to podcast together, and this show has made that possible. So
definitely,
I'm really excited we were able to make that happen. So Dan, before we get too into things, do you want to sort of just paint a little picture of your De Palma history?
It's really, The Untouchables is a really interesting part of that because prior to 87, I had definitely seen some De Palma films, but mostly they were just one and done. I had seen Carrie once. I had seen Dressed to Kill once. And I guess maybe Scarface was kind of in heavy rotation in cable. So that was the one that I had probably seen the most. But in a lot of ways, and I don't want to get into an old side tangent here, like kind of consider Scarface an outlier in De Palma. To some extent. There are definitely some De Palma-isms in there, but that was the one I probably had seen the most. But I didn't really get Dressed to Kill. And, I was major into, the 70s and 80s slashers at the time. And I saw, of course, the poster for Dressed to Kill, and I was looking for it, and I was like, it didn't quite scratch my itch for, a true slasher. But of course, I've grown to love it over the years. But Carrie definitely creeped me out as a kid. I probably saw it pretty young. And to be honest with you, Craig, it was probably the innate femininity of it that kind of was alien to me. That made it seem a little, that's scary, kind of scary, and things like that.
Not to slow you down because you're saying some great stuff here, but I got to tell you, when I started this podcast, I hadn't seen or watched Carrie in a really, really long time.
Right.
And I wasn't really interested in watching it, probably for similar reasons. I just remember not feeling entirely comfortable with the movie. Right. And it's since become one of my favorite De Palma films, and I've watched it a bunch of times in the last couple of months just because we did an episode 3 on it.
Yeah.
But yeah, one thing I will say about Dressed to Kill is, one thing that De Palma is always good at is like putting things on its sort of, turning it on its head.
Right.
And I think like filmmakers like Tarantino sort of have this thing where like he made his slasher film in Death Proof, and like you watch it and you're like, well, it's not a slasher film per se, but he used that template. Yeah. And De Palma is very much the same way. And I believe I said it on the Carrie episode, like De Palma to me seemed like, and this is no slight against De Palma or Hitchcock, but it always seemed to me like De Palma was like Hitchcock if Hitchcock was able to do everything he wanted to do.
Exactly. I mean, yeah. I don't think it's fair to the people that say, "Oh, De Palma is just a Hitchcock biter his whole career." No, because he does play in the same sandbox, but he does things. It goes a little bit farther in certain ways and a little weirder in certain ways, and everything. So
yeah, and I mean, I love Hitchcock, but I can say with extreme confidence that Hitchcock could not have made Carlito's Way.
Right. Right. Absolutely.
And that's another thing that really draws me to De Palma as a filmmaker. And it's one of the things I'm really trying to present with this podcast is De Palma, the dude is able to do multiple genres and do them very well, which,
Right.
certain filmmakers, Spielberg, for example, because that's a filmmaker a lot of people will reference. And I love Spielberg as well. But
Absolutely.
what was Spielberg's big attempt at comedy? 1941. And we all know how that went.
Right.
Whereas De Palma, he made a handful of legitimate, funny, successful from a filmmaking standpoint comedies.
Right.
And then, again, it's just the diversity of De Palma's filmography. And the other thing, and it might have just been coincidence or just wonderful happenstance, but De Palma never got pigeonholed. Like you make Scarface and then all of a sudden you're the Scarface guy and all you're doing is making gangster films or Carrie, like how many Stephen King adaptations can you do?
Right.
And that's really the remarkable thing about it. So you kind of said that Untouchables really was, the thing that got your attention with De Palma. And
Exactly.
I believe you're a couple years older than me. So you were in the workforce when that came out, right?
Absolutely. I'll be 55 this summer. So in June of 87, I was finishing my junior year of high school. Yes. And I was from 1985 to 1989, I was a projectionist, usher at an AMC movie theater in Virginia. So this was right in the middle of my years at the movie theater.
I got to say, that's probably the best 4 years that you could have worked at a movie theater.
I'm glad to hear you say that because I always felt that way, and it's in those films that, particularly the films that went through our theater from those years. If I sat down with a piece of paper, I could pretty much, within, over 75% accuracy, just recite all of the films that were released. And especially like any of the ones that I actually built the prints of. It's like, once you do that and have a hands-on part, you'll never forget this.
Yeah.
Those movies. And Untouchables was right in the center of that. And I can tell you from my experience, a big crowd pleaser. I mean, multiple theaters we had a multiplex and it was showing in 2 theaters, a lot of sellouts, stayed for like most of the summer. Things that you don't really see in the theaters these days, No,
and it's also really unique in the sense that I would say it's probably not until Mission Impossible did De Palma really do something that was as crowd pleasing. Yeah. And I would say Untouchables is even more so because with Mission Impossible, you were adapting sort of rebooting or reintroducing a TV show concept. And for as much as that sort of series has turned into what it's turned into, that first movie is a tight little spy film.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
With some set pieces. Whereas I think here, everything about the Untouchables is epic.
Right.
The cinematography, the score, the performances.
Amazing. Yes.
Yeah. So I can totally see that playing well with audiences. So was your first time seeing this movie like building if I remember correctly, Dan, knowing some people that have worked in theaters,
yeah,
you would put the print together and you would you watch it the night before?
Yes, but it was myself and probably 3 other projectionists who were trained to build prints. So I don't think that I built that particular one, but I showed up every Thursday night for the crew watch for sure.
Yeah.
And, we'd sneak a few beverages into, because it was just us, after hours. And I knew nothing about this film going into it. I didn't even know it was if you told me the name Brian De Palma, I would have recognized it, but I did not associate, a new De Palma film coming out. It was just, we're going to watch Untouchables. All right. I know who Kevin Costner is. It was pre Dances with Wolves, but post Silverado and, and everything. So
yeah, you had to be pretty tuned in to know Costner. He was by no
Right.
means,
I guess it was No Way Out. Was No Way Out already out by then, maybe? Or
I'm not sure because
yeah.
I remember when I was looking up this movie when we first talked about it, I know that De Palma had to get advice from other filmmakers that had worked with Costner before, and they were like, yeah, this guy's got a rocket on his back, you should get on, before he gets too far into the stratosphere.
Right. And you think back of especially of those years of he's in a resurgence now with the first wave of Costner success when he, the whole thing with him showing up in the Madonna movie. What a nerd,
Oh yeah, doesn't he say neat or something?
Yeah, neato or something. And how perfect for Elliot Ness, a straight arrow Boy Scout,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I do know that there's a really, really cool story around working at your theater there, but I do want to get into the scene before we get into that story. I would really want to hear. But we're going to be talking about the sort of the Canada sequence, for lack of a better word.
Mm-hmm.
As we know, this movie is more fiction than truth, and this entire sequence is fiction, but it's damn good filmmaking and effective filmmaking and epic filmmaking. And I would say I didn't count the amount of guns on screen, and Scarface has a lot of guns in it, but I think in terms of scope, this might be the grandest action scene De Palma ever did.
It's amazing. It's great. And I have to comment, like, one of the things, thank God that De Palma always has putting a good show up on the screen in his mind. Like, one of his first that was in the documentary, his documentary, where he talked about, well, the way in the book, Carrie, she just clutches her chest and falls. That's exciting.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So he knows.
Yeah, especially with all the religious overtones in Carrie. It's like, how can you not go for that imagery?
Exactly.
So to set up the scene a little bit, Ness and his team get wind of a deal that's going to be going down. Capone's team's going to be purchasing alcohol on the Canada side and transporting it into the United States. So it's a cooperative effort between the Canadian Mounties and Ness and his team, where they're going to bust them, I guess, as soon as they get on the American side.
Right. And the Canadians are not going to act until they're, signaled to and everything. Yeah.
So there is one sort of action moment I wanted to talk about, and I think it's a great Elliot Ness character moment. And it's when the Mountie says, knowledge or information is half the battle, that old G.I. Joe saying. Right. And Ness says something to the effect of, well, forget half the battle. What about the whole battle?
Right.
And I think that's a really, really good character moment, because it really sort of defines, like with Ness, it's all about that end result.
Exactly. Yeah. And the Connery character, helping him grapple with, what does he say? How far are you willing to go for this, end result? Does the means, justify the ends?
Yeah.
Yeah. Does the ends justify the means? I have it reversed, but yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So for whatever reason, the Canadians jumped the gun, and they alert.
I think they're sort of played a little bit for laughs.
The Mounties definitely came off as the sort of keystone cops of this movie. But then we get a whole sequence where Capone's team realizes there's an ambush in place. They position their cars on the bridge to create a barrier. And then Ness and his team are very focused on making sure that nobody escapes. Garcia gets dispatched. Garcia is one of the coolest characters in this whole movie. I can't wait to do a scene where he's really featured. But it's really not his sequence, because he's tasked with taking out a car, and he gets shot. And this is where we get to see the Oscar Wallace character, played by Charles Martin Smith, have sort of his hero moment, which is so cool, because he's this nerdy accountant.
First of all, I've always huge American Graffiti fan.
Mm-hmm.
Always loved Charles Martin Worthy. Starman. I mean, I love that De Palma cast him, and I love that he got this big moment.
Yeah.
Oh, and Buddy Holly story too. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's great to see that sort of action guy have his action moment where he sees one of his comrades shot, and then once he knows that he's okay, he reacts and he sort of gets caught up in the moment, and there's some great gunplay and then even some physical action where he uses the butt of the gun to take somebody out. One other thing I noticed about this, and one thing you can say about sort of technology today, and we're both old enough to remember when you watched movies on 27-inch TVs on VCRs. But one thing I did notice with this 4K presentation of the movie is everybody's riding their horses, even Connery. And those little details matter. And I have no idea, at what point De Palma got involved in saying, okay, here's how much of the horse you're going to ride, Sean, and then the stunt guy will take over. But it's clear that the four of them are riding together. And I think the way they approach the bridge, the composition of that shot is great. But the other thing I really like, and I've talked about this, and I'll repeat myself a lot on this show, is the geography of De Palma action sequences.
Oh, yes.
You're never at a loss for where things are occurring. And it shows how important just giving a shit and planning is, as opposed to trying to figure something out in the editing room.
Exactly. Even with that wide expanse, Montana standing in for Canada border, by the way.
Yeah.
Which is beautiful, beautiful. But you still, in your mind, okay, the shack where they were waiting is right down there. You can still remember where it is in terms of where they're at, in this big setting and everything like that.
Yeah, and that's the great thing about De Palma action scenes is you're never lost. And apparently that's harder to do than we know, because not many people do it. A lot of times you'll just get these close cuts and quick action and you have no idea what the geography is.
Yeah.
Is there any particular moment in this sort of bridge scene that you wanted to highlight?
Well, just to go back to, and I remember this because when it was playing and I didn't have any other pressing things, it was one of the many films I would just stand in the back of the theater to watch. The audience reactions it was big cheers. And it's kind of ironic because this is like big. There's some deaths and some shooting going on, but it was a big crowd pleasing part, and one of the biggest was after his hero moment, Charles Martin Murphy, when he ducks down and takes himself a swig of whiskey. That was always a big crowd pleaser for sure.
Yeah, no, and that gets back to the sense of humor that De Palma has.
Right.
And of course, that's a moment that was written by David Mamet. But actually, I don't know. I have no idea. It could have been an improv.
Right.
It wouldn't put it. I wouldn't be surprised if Mamet had scripted that based on what I know about him as a writer. But I think the other thing that really helps this scene is the Morricone score.
Oh, amazing! Yes.
This is one of those scenes, and I know if you go on YouTube, you can find like epic movie scenes without the score, and it really shows you how important every element is. The visuals are important, but at the same time, the sound design and the score are equally as important. And this is a very Hollywood score. It might be De Palma's most Hollywood score. It's
great. And, they're on horseback. It would not sound out of place on an epic Western or something like that,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I don't know if we talked about this offline or not, but part of this sequence, we have the bridge sequence. And then do you want to pivot and talk about the Shaq's portion of this scene?
Well, that's what I a little bit, because of the audience reaction. That was one of the things I was going to talk about is that so some of the tactics that are employed by Jimmy, by the hardened Chicago cop, even though it's grisly in a way, it was the laughs were huge for that one. They were not shocked by that, the audiences, at all. They thought it was great.
Yeah. Well, I think it's funny too, because Ness is forced to kill somebody pretty much that he doesn't speak English.
No.
And I don't know whether or not that's part of the confusion or if that guy was he was guns blazing until he
Am I
dropped.
correct that ended? Was that supposed to be one of Capone's either brothers or close relatives? That
Oh,
character,
I believe you're right. Yeah, he might have been. Yeah,
right? Right.
yeah. So we have a dead body,
Right.
and
And it's dead. It's
well,
dead.
yeah, and this is like sort of akin to like like what's that rule? Like when you show a gun, by the third time, the gun's got to be used. I think
Right.
the great thing about this sequence is they're interrogating Capone's bookkeeper to
Right.
get information, and he's not going to give it up because he knows what kind of person Capone is. And as as Jimmy's doing what he does, I think as viewers, we jump ahead and realize what's about to happen, that he's going to use this dead body as a prop to show this bookkeeper that they mean business, and he's going to kill somebody in cold blood that's already dead.
That's right, because the bookkeeper can't turn around and see what's going on, what the previous thing was. Yeah.
Yeah, he just hears a discussion, and then he hears a gunshot, and then, of course, he gives it all up. Just a remarkable sequence in a movie that's full of remarkable sequences. It's funny, I have at least one more recording scheduled around the Untouchables, and we're not at a loss for scenes to talk about. I know you had a couple of scenes you suggested, but I wouldn't be surprised, Dan, if this ends up being the movie that I cover the most amount of scenes from. We'll see. We'll see. So you were working at the theater in '87, and you said offline that the theater was in proximity to an arena.
Yeah. So my theater was called the AMC Coliseum 4, which was in Hampton, Virginia, in the Tidewater, Newport News, Virginia Beach, Norfolk area. It's all sort of one megalopolis, connected by bridges and waterways and plenty of military bases, etc.
And the Coliseum is a pretty famous venue. I know I have quite a few. Yeah, I have quite a few dead bootlegs.
Exactly. And that was a sweet span of years for the Dead also.
That, I mean, not to get into it, but that's spring '89.
The Warlocks.
89 into 90. I mean, right up until Brent died. I mean, man, they were cooking. There's some great.
Yep, I was at most of those, and the Washington D.C. RFK ones as well.
Oh wow, is that the one that's on that big DVD set they put out?
I think so. Yeah, recently, I had been listening to it recently. So,
oh my goodness, that's offline. I'm going to have to talk to you about the Dead because I got on the bus way too late.
Absolutely, I'll be glad to.
So you're near Hampton Coliseum. So you had several encounters with fans that were coming through town, and on their off day they would watch a movie.
Exactly. So my theater was actually adjacent, connected to the Sheridan, where if they were staying overnight, almost all of the artists would stay there. And not surprisingly, they're bored on tour. And if they have an opportunity to catch a film, many of them did so. And when we're talking about the Untouchables, one of the days that it was a matinee, obviously, because they had a show, but the band, the Hooters, were there. And when I say they were watching the film, Craig, they were the only ones left just watching the credits after everyone else had filed out. And they were, it had been out a couple of weeks and they hadn't had a chance to see it yet. And they were just over the moon. As I found out later, because they're a Philly band. I live near Philly now.
Yeah.
They are very astute in film and all sorts of music and the arts. And they were big De Palma fans because he shares their Philadelphia roots, and they even talked that day. We sat after the film and chatted for probably 15 minutes, and they were talking about on and on about Blowout, which I don't know if I had seen Blowout at that time.
Yeah,
but they were big fans of that, and they just loved this. They thought the score was incredible and interesting because their name comes from the melodica or whatever. They called it a Hooter.
Oh, okay.
But which I think Morricone kind of uses that in some of the parts of the score.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
But they were great. got us some. They were on tour with Bryan Adams at the time. Got us some tickets for the show, and that was. I always associate the Untouchables with them and talking to them about that.
No,
And-
that's such a cool memory to have associated with that movie. I think the only time I ever watched a movie with a famous person was Crocodile Dundee 2. Me and my brother were the only ones in the theater with Gene Shalit. I don't know if you remember Gene Shalit or not. And I'm gonna have to ask my brother when we're done recording because he said something to us when the movie ended. And God, I wish I remembered. My brother's got a much better memory than me. But yeah,
did he wrinkle his gigantic mustache at you?
But your story is much better. I can't imagine how cool it is seeing.
It was just the two main singer-songwriters, the Eric Bazillion and Rob Hyman, and it's like I'm jealous. You got such a cool job. It's like, come on, guys. Thank you. But it's like if I could just hang out and watch movies all day, I would love that, is what they said. But
especially I mean, if you think about it, VHS was big back then, but it was still costly, and I'd imagine, bringing, you could only bring a certain amount of movies on a bus with you, whereas nowadays you have access to anything you want to watch. So this was
6 months for the release, and
super, super cool discussion here. Is there anything you want to sort of talk about this sequence overall before we wrap things up?
Pretty much the main thing, Craig, that I would remember is what a crowd-pleasing sequence this was, and it's kind of interesting because it feels like a triumphant ending, but then the film takes pretty dark turns right after that, and everything. Yeah. And I will say this, because me and all of the crew loved that movie, and because it was just the dialogue was so great, as happens whenever you're in a workplace. You start using the lines in the workplace back and forth to each other. So, and of course, we had a Jimmy on the crew,
Yeah.
And it was his break time. Take a break, Jimmy.
That's
Get out of town.
Yeah. So I do hope that this is not the last time that we podcast together.
Oh, absolutely.
I hope we can come on and talk about more De Palma in the future. And I know that you're not currently podcasting, but you did have a podcast. You want to tell people a little bit about that?
It's on indefinite hiatus. If myself and hopefully my partner free up some schedule, will come back. It's called Artifact. We're here in Delaware. It's primarily about music, but we bleed over into music-centric films. And I had just, funny enough, last week reposted an episode we did about the film Over the Edge from 1979, where we had interviewed the screenwriter Charlie Haas, who had worked with Joe Dante and with Tim Hunter a couple of times. So if you could, Craig, post I'll provide the link to that, and please
absolutely.
check it out. And we're hoping to come back with new content in the future. Yes.
Yeah, that's awesome. Like I said, I'll include all relevant links, but I mean, you talked to some pretty heavy hitters.
We tried. I can't take the credit. My partner Matt has been in the music business as a venue owner and a musician for many years, from Virginia also, and he had a lot of contacts, and we were really, really lucky. It was a great time doing this. We're just so busy.
Yeah, no, that's the one thing about life, man. It gets in the way, and we all sort of just, we all podcast for different reasons, but at the end of the day, it's all about having fun. Right. But sadly, we have to take care of business too. Dan, this was such a fun discussion. And again, you have an open invitation to come back and talk to Palma anytime you want.
I would love to. It's been a lot of fun for me as well, Craig. Thank you for the time.
All right, excellent. We'll talk soon.
Take care.
Hi.
You were great.
Thank you.
You were great. Thanks for having us. That was really generous.
Sure. Thanks for coming.
We thought it was neat.
Neat?
Yeah, really neat. Yeah.
No one's ever described it quite that way. Hi.
Yeah. Okay. Have fun tonight.